Welcome to Sense of Place. It's so good to have you here in the theater, have you tuning in from home on the live stream. My name's Sarah Fox. I'm the host and curator of Sense of Place. And tonight I'm very excited to have my friend Jill here helping me do the introduction. Her buddy Dumpling is someone who you'll get to meet later. So tonight we're going to talk about rattlesnakes. What was that? Do I think that they know you're not a rattlesnake? Well, I'm sure some people here know that you're not a rattlesnake. And I bet they know that you're a gopher snake. Yeah. But sometimes people confuse you for a rattlesnake, huh? Yeah. Okay, so tonight, though, we're not going to talk about gopher snakes like Jill. We're going to talk about rattlesnakes. So, what was that? Do I think they notice how beautiful you are? Oh, yeah. I think so. Do you guys notice how beautiful Jill is? She'd like a little attention tonight. Yeah. Oh, no. No, I'm sure there's no one in here who's scared of snakes, right? Okay. But if there was someone who was scared of snakes, we would want to tell them thank you, right? Because it's a big deal to be around something that you're scared of. And when I was thinking about tonight and what I wanted to share before we welcomed out Adrian, I thought about llamas, obviously, right? That's you. There, that's me. So that cute kid on the right is me, and that's my llama Shadow, my little brother. And the reason I thought about llamas when I was thinking about rattlesnakes is because when I was growing up, I was very fortunate to grow up with llamas. We were on a small farm, and we took our llamas backpacking, but eventually I also did 4-H with my llamas. So I would take them to the fair every summer for a week, and it was my favorite week of the entire year, because I got to go learn about sheep and pigs and goats and cattle, and I got to hang out with kids from all over the state. And I was in a group, our 4-H club was called the Llama Lovers. 2 L's in lovers, obviously. And one of the expectations of being in this group was that when it came fair time, you needed to help educate the public about llamas. And so leading up to this most favorite week of the year, I would do my research and I would refresh all my llama facts, and I could tell you, okay, a baby llama is a cria, the first milk is colostrum, llamas don't do very well carrying weight in the middle of their back, but they can carry it really well distributed on the sides. I mean, this was a big deal. I still remember all this stuff now. And so I would go to fair ready to tell people about these amazing animals, and the fair would start, and the gates would open, and the public would show up, and I would be there as that little kid, so ready to tell them what I knew. And all I would hear was, do they spit? Llamas spit. Kids, get away. Llamas spit. Don't touch it. Stay away. Llamas spit. Llamas spit. Llamas spit. Llamas spit. And so here I am, so excited to tell them about colostrum and baby llamas and how they carry their weight. And more often than not, all any of them wanted to do was either ask me about them spitting or tell their kids that's all they do is spit. And as a really curious kid, it was really confusing to me because I thought there's way cooler stuff than they spit. I mean, like llamas hum to communicate. And so often, we never even got to that point because no one even asked. They were too scared. And so tonight, I'm particularly happy that there's been such overwhelming interest in this topic. And it's been great, the number of people I've heard who said, I am very scared of snakes, and that is why I'm coming. So kudos to you who are here because you are fearful. Because if I've learned anything over the course of my career, when it comes to fear, the best antidote is curiosity. So I'm so glad to have you here. And there's another curious kid that we're going to meet tonight, and her name's Adrian Slade. Adrian was obviously very curious as a kid about snakes And she has carried that curiosity into adulthood and into a professional career, studying as a herpetologist and learning about snakes all over the state, in Washington and Oregon. And we're going to get to hear more about why she has this love and what she's learned in the process. And hopefully she'll convince you guys to have a little more love for rattlesnakes, because I think they could use it. Hi. And maybe a little more love for gopher snakes too. Hi. Yeah. Before I have Adrian come out, I want to give you guys an update for those of you who were here last week, or if you read in the Columbia Gorge News, which I'm sure you all did because everyone has a subscription to support their local news, because we need local news. You know that our parent nonprofit, Mount Adams Institute, has made the difficult decision to dissolve, and they're in the process of closing down. And last month I told you that doesn't mean Sense of Place is going away. Sense of Place is going to stick around. And between last month and this month, with the help of some really amazing community members and board members, we made a decision that Sense of Place will carry on as its own nonprofit after 16 years. So finally stepping out. Thank you. So I will keep you guys in the loop of what that looks like. I'm in the process now of doing all the boring pieces that get us going. But what's important for you guys to know is the programs are going to stay the same. I have some exciting stuff planned already. I am so grateful for those of you who have already stepped up to support with expertise. For those of you who will be called upon, whether you know it or not, to be helping out. For those of you who hand me checks in the lobby, I'll never turn that down. So thank you all. Stay tuned. Sign up for the newsletter or follow us on socials. I hate to say that, but honestly, just keep in touch so that you know what's coming next, because there's some really good stuff planned already. And then the last thing for tonight that's really important is sort of an overview of logistics. We are going to hear from Adrian, and she will present. And when she's done, we'll do Q&A like we usually do. I'll run around and ask questions. And then at the end, I'm going to probably end us a little bit early. If you need to sneak out, please do. But if you can stay, I hope you will. We've got Jill here, a gopher snake. Her buddy Dumpling is here. We've got Cooper and Tickler, who are the rattlesnakes here behind me. One of them, probably Cooper. When Adrian's done, we're going to ask folks if you need to leave quietly. And Tyler is here to help get one of the rattlesnakes into a tube, which will allow us to safely touch the rattlesnake and have them feel secure with you touching them. So we're just going to ask, though, just be thoughtful and be aware and give a little buffer. And you'll have plenty of time with the snakes at the end. And with that, help me welcome Adrian Slade to Sense of Place Season 16.
I think Jill really likes you. I want to thank Sense of Place for hosting me and giving me a platform to speak on behalf of my favorite animals tonight. Oh, I'm already tearing up. I also want to thank all of you for being here tonight and being willing to learn about these deeply misunderstood creatures. I am so grateful to my family, my mom, my mentor, Dr. Dan Beck, friends and colleagues, and then of course, last but not least, my partner, Tyler Larson. He played a big role in helping shape up this presentation, and Tyler and I took the majority of the rattlesnake photos that you'll see in this talk tonight. And you'll notice that there's no fangs out, no menacing caricatures of rattlesnakes to be found here tonight, just wild, mostly unbothered animals right where we found them in their natural habitat. And last, but certainly not least, I want to thank the rattlesnakes. I'm doing this for them. You know, I love rattlesnakes so much. I think I love them more than I love people. My therapist calls this avoidant attachment style, but all I know is that a snake has never let me down. So right about now, you might be thinking, oh, this person's crazy. What is there to love about snakes? Aren't they just these primitive, lowly creatures? a nuisance, a threat to my safety? People tend to have very strong feelings about snakes. We're taught to view them as the ultimate other. But just because something is different from us doesn't make it evil. Snakes have long captured our collective imagination. Our primate brains are hardwired to notice them. But that instinct isn't fear, it's attention and curiosity. We're inherently fascinated with them. I grew up loving snakes. I can't ever remember being afraid of them, and it turns out that's actually the default. Scientists have shown that babies are not innately afraid of snakes. They learn that fear later from watching the expressions of adults. As a kid, I got really lucky. My parents nurtured my passion for snakes, the same way that other kids get to obsess over more innocuous things like birds or dinosaurs. I remember thinking that snakes looked like they were smiling at me, the way that their mouths turned up at the edges. I caught them, I named them, I wrote stories about them. I owe them a great deal. And I don't know if you can read my 7-year-old handwriting here tonight, but it says in the corner there that I will be a snake helper when I grow up. So here I am, trying to help. My first loves were garter snakes, but rattlesnakes have become my favorite, and after tonight, I think you'll see why. As a society, we have been taught to fear and vilify rattlesnakes, but just as fear is learned, it can be unlearned. I'm not asking you to love rattlesnakes the way I do, but I know things about them that might change the way you see them, and I hope you leave with a newfound understanding and appreciation for these marginalized animals. They're not our enemies, and they're a lot more like us than you might think. So tonight, let's meet the rattlesnake with an open mind. This is our protagonist for the evening, the northern Pacific rattlesnake, Crotalus oreganus. They're the only venomous snake in this region, and they live east of the Cascade Crest in Washington, inhabiting the pine oak woodland and shrub steppe biomes in the gorge. And they've been in this area for over 10,000 years, around as long as people have. A West Coast endemic, Northern Pacific's range, is shown here in red on the map, and they're strongly associated with rocky environments in the Pacific Northwest. They have this classic viper build, a stocky, wide body that's tapered at both ends, and a wide heart-shaped head that's distinct from their neck. They have relatively large eyes and elliptical pupils, allowing them to have good vision, and their scales are matte and keeled with a rough, not shiny look, and they have a blunt banded tail that ends in a rattle. They can be shades of green, brown, tan, cream. Gorge rattlesnakes tend to be on the greener side. And they have rounded dorsal saddles going down their body that fade into bands near their tail. And every rattlesnake's pattern is unique to that animal, like a fingerprint. Males are larger than females, and they're often more green. So in this photo, there's a male on the upper right there attending a smaller, more dainty brown female. Males have longer tails than females, and their tail banding is higher contrast, almost like they're wearing striped pants. And females' tails are a little bit more drab-colored, muted, and this female, her tail is on the bottom there, is actually pregnant. At birth, they're about 6 to 8 inches long and mostly brown and cream-colored, and then they can reach lengths of between 3 and 4 feet long. 4 is really long, though. It's pretty unusual. And they come into their unique adult coloration as they age. Before we dive into rattlesnakes, let's cover a little basic snake biology. So all snakes have this limbless body plan that allows them to get into tight spaces like rodent burrows. And importantly, all rattlesnakes and all reptiles and amphibians for that matter are ectotherms, which basically means that unlike endotherms who use this energetically expensive metabolism to heat themselves, snakes warm and cool their bodies using their environment. So they behaviorally thermoregulate, shifting between thermal microhabitats like shade and sun, or maybe a little bit of both in this snake's case. And realizing that they're always moderating their body temperature explains a lot about their behavior at any given moment, right? So ectothermy is this really energy-efficient lifestyle because a rattlesnake only needs to consume about 1/10 of the calories of a similar-sized mammal. When you don't spend a lot of energy, you get to live a long time. Northern Pacifics can get over 20 years old in the wild and even older in captivity, and they use their cryptic patterns to blend in and stay hidden from predators. They spend a lot of their life sitting just like this, coiled in elegant repose, blending in. But it's also a position that they use for hunting. So in theme with this low energy approach to life, rattlesnakes are ambush predators. So instead of actively seeking prey, they set up shop in different spots and wait for prey to come to them. Rattlesnakes eat lots of different small animals like birds and lizards, but their favorite and primary food source are rodents, things like mice and squirrels. But how to catch a mouse? Food fights back. If you think about it, all sorts of other carnivores who eat rodents have tons of weapons to address the issue of subduing live prey. Shearing bills, sharp talons, sharp teeth. Snakes, being limbless and all, have to be pretty scrappy to deal with the issue of killing their food. So non-venomous snakes use their strong muscles to constrict their prey, like mountain king snakes and rubber boas and gopher snakes. Rattlesnakes, they're just not built for constriction. Instead, they have a secret weapon, their venom. So I want you to listen closely now. In rattlesnakes, venom evolved as a risk reduction strategy to kill their prey without prolonged physical contact. They need it to eat. And the last thing they want to do is waste the precious energy required to produce their venom on something that they can't eat. So they'll use it for defense as an absolute last resort, but even then, they're judicious with how much venom they can use. Their venoms are hyper-adapted to their local prey communities, like this bushy-tailed wood rat located in the stomach of this very pleased rattlesnake. So one quick myth I want to address. Baby rattlesnakes, they're not more dangerous than adults. In order to get big enough to eat things like bushy-tailed wood rats, this snake first has to eat little things like lizards. So at this age, its venom composition might be slightly different. But venom yield is correlated with body size. So juveniles are technically less dangerous than adults because they can't deliver as much venom in a bite. Rattlesnakes also do this magical thing called rain harvesting. When it rains, hails, or even snows, they'll coil up into a personal water bowl, flattening their body and drinking the water droplets off their scales. And their scales have nanochannels on them that act to increase surface area, making them better at holding water. This is thought to be an adaptation to the arid environments from which rattlesnakes diversified several million years ago. And when they rain harvest, they'll drink water off of themselves, nearby surfaces, as well as each other's bodies. It's incredibly endearing. So rattlesnakes have a few special evolutionary innovations that make them really unique. So first, all rattlesnakes belong to a group of snakes known as pit vipers, who are named for the heat-detecting pits located in paired structures on the front of their face, like little dimples. So within each heat pit is a membrane laden with heat-sensitive proteins, and these structures act in concert with the snake's brain to essentially give them thermal vision. Pretty amazing. So they use their heat pits to, of course, find their warm-blooded prey, as well as locate basking areas and to see the thermal signature of predators. Speaking of predators, the most iconic rattlesnake superpower is, of course, the rattle. So the rattle is a specialized anti-predator warning device, completely unique to rattlesnakes. How amazing is that? In fact, their genus actually means little bell in Greek, crotalus. So rattlesnakes are these inherently underfoot animals. They're easily stepped on. And so to address this dangerous inconvenience, they developed the rattle to warn animals to stay away from them. The rattle is made of keratin, the same material as our fingernails, and baby rattlesnakes are born with just one little button. They can't even make any noise with it. And as they grow, each time a rattlesnake sheds its skin, they develop a new segment at the base of their rattle. And when they shake their specialized tail shaker muscles, these hollow interlocking rattle segments bang against one another, producing that rattling noise that we know. Rattles can break, and snakes shed at different rates as they age. So we can't age a rattlesnake based off their rattle, but if the baby button is still intact, like here on the bottom left, we can see how many times a snake has shed its skin in its life. The rattle is also much more than just a warning device. It's kind of like a personal accessory to them. So they're very sassy with it, and you have to understand, I have a very funny relationship with these creatures. I spend so much time trying to spy on them, like some sort of rattlesnake ninja, except I'm not good at it, and they're always onto me. And so when they're feeling suspicious, they'll often just show me their rattle, like this snake here, as if I may have forgotten who he is. And sometimes they'll just give me a little warning flick, as if to say, don't make me use this thing. And I think that the longer the rattle is, the more showy they are with it. I don't know. But anyways, they keep me in line. They're also very conscientious of their rattle. So as they trundle around on the landscape, they hold it up like a little flag, taking care not to let it drag through the dirt or get caught up in things, sort of like a designer handbag or something. It's pretty cute. But there's lots of myths about the rattle, so let's clear those up. First, when other snakes shake their tail, they're not mimicking rattlesnakes. Tail shaking is actually an ancestral anti-predator snake behavior that is thought to have led to the evolution of the rattle. And rattlesnakes are not evolving to rattle less. The truth is, they still have plenty of predators to worry about, but rattling is a last resort because it gives them away. They would much prefer to hide or flee instead. And if they feel that they have no recourse, like this poor snake here who I surprised while he was crossing a wide gravel road, he had nowhere to hide, and I towered over him, so he bravely stood his ground and rattled at me. But make no mistake, he was terrified. Snakes don't chase people. When they're trying to get away from a perceived threat, they might take the quickest route to get to cover, which could look like going right past your legs. But they don't attack people, they don't chase people. That doesn't make any sense. They're tiny compared to us. And they're really non-confrontational. So a study in Arizona found that when 175 rattlesnakes were stepped on with a fake leg, only 6 of them opted to strike the leg. All of the others just sheepishly slithered away, even after being stepped on. So rattlesnakes are these shy, risk-avoidant animals, and the rattle is a perfect example of that. My advisor, Dr. Dan Beck, found that basal rattle segment width is correlated with snake body length. So as the snake grows, so does the width of its rattle. And we can also look at the rattle and see when females start having babies. So the red line here is female rattles and the blue line is males, and we're plotting growth over time. And we can see that at a certain point, female rattles stop growing. And what's happening there is that they're allocating their energy to reproduction rather than growth. And just by looking at a rattle, it tells us a story about the snake. So we see how in this area here, there's a really wide segment and then some narrower segments sandwiching it. So those narrower segments suggest that that snake was having a hard time finding food that year, while the wider segment was a good growth year. I also love this photo because the snake is in shed in this picture, and you can see where the scales are forming into a new rattle segment. Okay, it's time to talk about the tongue. I've been waiting. So the tongue is the most important sensory system for rattlesnakes. When they flick their tongue, they pick up molecules and deliver them to an exquisitely sensitive organ located in the roof of their mouth, which talks to their brain. So the deep forking of the tongue plus that up and down flicking motion allows them to essentially taste or smell the world in 3D. So snakes are attuned to this invisible world of chemical trails that we humans really don't know anything about. And they use their tongue to navigate the landscape, find food, avoid predators, find other snakes, and communicate with each other. Baby rattlesnakes flick their tongues to follow the chemical cues of their mothers. And during the breeding season, males will fixate on the pheromone trail of a female and follow her for weeks. Yikes. With a single tongue flick, a snake can tell what species another snake is, its sex, its age, whether they're related, and probably a lot of other things. So they live in this incredibly rich chemosensory world. Rattlesnakes use their tongues to find resources, and arguably the most important one for a snake in the gorge is a winter den. So this is a place where they can shelter through the colder months and avoid freezing. And these are called hibernacula, and they're often specific sites located within basalt outcrop structures that are carefully chosen by the snakes. In our area, we are lucky enough to have many situations where rattlesnakes will overwinter communally for both environmental and social reasons. And these communal rattlesnake dens can house dozens to over 100 snakes, spanning multiple generations, like rattlesnake societies. Communal rattlesnake dens are magical places. They're like a theater for social behavior. Snakes are just laying around, languidly basking in the sun, piling on top of one another like nonchalant dragons. And there I am in the background, army crawling around with my camera like some sort of demented monkey, and the snakes pay me very little mind. If I violate the rules of their culture, like moving too quickly or taking a careless step, I might elicit a disgruntled rattle, but nothing more. Despite my intrusion, they are very forgiving. Den sites are sacred places where the snakes are extremely vulnerable, and they should be treated with the utmost secrecy and respect. Communal rattlesnake hibernacula are passed down through generations, and rattlesnakes follow each other's scent trails closely to locate the dens. And they'll often use the same dens year after year for their entire lives in a behavior called site fidelity. And this extends beyond their winter dens. Rattlesnakes return to their favorite hunting sites, shedding sites, and birthing sites, or nurseries, over the course of their long and storied lives. They become creatures of habit, learning and remembering their favorite places and faithfully returning to them every year. In other words, they too have a strong sense of place. Okay, so now it's time for snake stories, where I'm going to depart from the lecture format for a little bit and just tell you way too much about a snake who I know and love. So one of my favorite examples of rattlesnake site fidelity is a snake named Scott. Scott lives near a visitor center at a wind farm outside Ellensburg, and him and many other snakes come to the visitor center during the active season for foraging because the human activity brings in a lot of extra rodents. But there's lots of people and tourists walking around off trail here, and so sometimes rattlesnakes are relocated for both public and snake safety. We first got called up for Scott in May 2018, right as a big administrative meeting was letting out. And Scott was conspicuously hanging out right next to the walking path. So we caught him in front of a big crowd, note the full parking lot. We named him after the site manager, painted a segment of his rattle blue to identify him in the future, but we also noted that Scott has these unique tail band markings. You can see these little half bands here. And we can use these to identify Scott if and when his rattle paint fades, because his pattern is like a fingerprint. So we relocated Scott about a half mile away to a nearby rattlesnake den that we'd mapped earlier that spring. And this is about as far as anyone should safely relocate a rattlesnake. Any further, and you risk moving them outside of their home territory, and they can potentially get lost and starve. And relocation is stressful, which is why we put Scott at a den, because there'd be lots of scent trails of other rattlesnakes there for him to reorient himself. And reorient himself he did. So he came back the following spring within 6 days of the previous year. Pretty impressive. And this is good news, because an old snake like Scott has strong annual site fidelity. And Scott knows where he wants to be every year around the second or third week of May. And that's hunting ground squirrels at the visitor center. Relocation be damned. So this means that Scott handled the relocation well, and he was back in his routine. Once this was explained to the staff, everyone was excited that Scott had returned, and people came up during his processing to visit him, and he was relocated again. And I also want to add that Scott is a total sweetheart. He's never even rattled at us, despite our, let's be honest, harassment. So this is very typical of an older wild male rattlesnake. They're super laid back. Scott came back the following spring as well, but then we did, you can see his rattle paint here too. Some of it was still on his rattle. But then we didn't see him for the next 2 years. And that doesn't mean he wasn't there, just nobody saw him. And then in 2023, Scott made his biggest appearance yet. So, right as the annual administrative meeting was letting out, yet again, there was Scott, right next to the full parking lot, eating a Townsend's ground squirrel. A species of concern in Washington, no less. So, there was quite a commotion. These photos were like all over Facebook. It was a whole thing. And Scott's namesake and dozens of others watched on with pride as Scott ate the ground squirrel. So at this point, Scott was such a celebrity that he was given a little placard and was even allowed to stay and digest that year-making meal until he was relocated a few days later after he'd passed a little bit. So he showed up and got into the squirrel jar again in 2024, business as usual. But then, later that year, a large dead rattlesnake was reported on the main road. And most snakes have to cross this road to get from their den to the visitor center each year, and I always worry about Scott. And the carcass was scavenged before I could look at it, and then Scott wasn't at his usual winter den that fall, so I was really worried that we had lost him. Boy, was I happy to be wrong. Last spring, Scott was back at the visitor center, but at this time, he was in a less conspicuous area away from the walking path, and he was with a friend. So Scott's over there, that's his friend. So they didn't need to be relocated because they weren't near the walking path, and they just stuck around for a few weeks, digesting their ground squirrels, shedding their skin together before they slipped off into the sagebrush sea. Scott hasn't been touched by a human since 2024, and I love that for him. I think he's had more than enough of people, and probably me in particular. So here he is with his friend the last time I saw him. That's Scott on the right. He's a really big head. He's such a good snake. I love Scott, and I love his story. I love Scott. He's such an incredible example of rattlesnake memory and sight fidelity, right, on both a spatial and a temporal scale. Like, his punctuality is incredible. And the best part about Scott is that he's an ambassador for his species. He's changed a lot of people's minds about rattlesnakes, turning fear to stewardship. And I hope I get to see him this spring. In addition to memory and sight fidelity, rattlesnakes are much more social than people realize. They're often found in groups throughout the year, and certain snakes form strong associations together even when they're not related, like friendships. Cooper and Tickler here live with 2 other male rattlesnakes, but they pretty much spend all their time together. It's basically a bromance. Rattlesnakes cuddle with each other, adults hang out with babies. Hi, baby. They do all these behaviors that indicate they're really social animals. Look, they're embracing one another. A recent study found that rattlesnakes who were exposed to a stressful stimulus were significantly less stressed when they were with a companion snake. They were comforted by each other's company on a hormonal level. This is called social buffering, and I'm pretty sure Cooper and Tickler are doing it right now. During the breeding season, males will romance females by vigorously twitching their heads all over her body and squeezing her with their tail. The females over here looking super unimpressed. Sometimes multiple males will court a female at the same time, like what's happening right now, and they get so wrapped up in it that they more or less just end up courting each other. And during courtship, things can get pretty weird, like this poor male here who got strangled by the other male's tail. I think he was trying to be squeezing the female, but super awkward. The females never seem very impressed with this behavior. Did you see that? She slaps him with her rattle. So they'll slap males away with their rattle when they've had enough of all these antics. It's all just really ridiculous. Anyone who has spent time watching rattlesnakes will tell you that they have distinct personalities. It's not just me, I'm not crazy. So some snakes are more laid back, while others are more jumpy or protective, and then others are just unhinged, like this male who leapt from a 6-foot-high vertical crack onto a pile of his unsuspecting den mates, and then proceeded to try and pick a fight with this other male who was just trying to take a nap in the sun. As my friend Linnea said, they are truly unserious creatures. They have their own story, their own drama, social circles. Each one of them is special. And once we realize this, it becomes much harder to maintain this view of them as primitive or unfeeling, right? Because they're not. There is perhaps no better showcasing of rattlesnake shenanigans than at Project Rattlecam's YouTube page. Dr. Emily Taylor, a rattlesnake biologist at Cal Poly, had the brilliant idea to place remote cameras at rattlesnake dens and live stream their footage on YouTube. And the social behavior and general rattlesnake antics documented on these cameras is just unbelievable. So I highly recommend checking out their YouTube page. So you can see I'm a faithful subscriber. Okay, so now let's go over the annual rhythm of a northern Pacific rattlesnake in the gorge. So starting right about now, like probably today, snakes are just starting to wake up. So They will stage for several weeks at the den until temperatures stabilize. And at this time, there's a lot of courting and breeding going on. And then as temperatures climb into the 70s and 80s in a consistent manner, snakes leave their den in a staggered process called egress. And in this area, that's usually around mid-April to early May, but it really depends on the time of year and season and site. It's usually like right when we have that first big heat wave where it gets up in the 80s. And at this time of year, they're diurnal or they're daytime active, so they're really likely to be encountered on trails and roads and whatnot. They're going out looking for their first meal in like 6 months, and they're just generally very active. Moving into the summer months, they adopt a more crepuscular activity pattern, so they're active in the mornings, evenings, and at night. And a lot is going on in the summer, so they're hunting, shedding, breeding. Males will combat each other in this beautiful combat ritual for alleged breeding rights to females, but it's really murky as to whether that has any influence on female choice. When rattlesnakes shed, they basically go blind while they form a new scale covering their eye. So they're super vulnerable, and a good protecting shedding site is a must-have. So they form site fidelity to their shedding rocks, and then males will follow females to the shed rocks, and it becomes like a summer den all over again. There's like 8 snakes in that photo, all at a shed rock. So very fun. Love shed rocks. Summer is also baby season. Female rattlesnakes reproduce every 2 to 3 years, and they give live birth at special sites called nurseries. Female rattlesnakes can store sperm from mating events that remains viable for up to 6 years, and then they can draw on these sperm stores to create multiple paternity in their litters. Pretty crazy. After they give birth, female rattlesnakes attend their babies, or pups, for about 2 weeks until the babies have their first shed and are independent enough to go out into the world on their own. Maternal care is actually thought of as a pillar of all pit viper behavior, so all rattlesnakes, copperheads, cottonmouths do this. Sometimes, multiple females will use the same nursery site and they'll take turns looking after each other's babies, like babysitting. So this female here is not the mother of these babies. She's actually still pregnant herself. She's just babysitting. Witnessing maternal care is one of the things that made me fall so much more deeply in love with rattlesnakes because it's just so opposite the stereotypes that are ascribed to them, right? They're not monsters, they're mothers. Now it's time for another snake story. So our next snake is Penelope. Once upon a time, Tyler and I found this beautiful wild female rattlesnake basking outside of a little rock shelter in August, which is peak baby season. We named her Penelope, obviously, and she saw us approaching and retreated into her little shelter. But then she came right back out like she had a reason to be there. And then we realized why she didn't want to leave. Penelope had recently given birth, and her baby was out exploring. So here are some clips of Penelope watching over her baby. Get back in there. Tyler named the baby Buttons, didn't you, Tyler? Buttons. Penelope was a really good mom. So late summer and fall is baby season, very special time. And then as temperatures start to drop in September and October, snakes migrate back to their winter dens. This is another period of high activity. They're following scent trails, trucking back to the hibernacula. Newborns have never been to the dens before, so they rely really heavily on following adult scent trails, especially their mother's scent trails. And some snakes don't make it back to the den in time, and they just have to wing it and hope for the best with an overwintering site. And then from about November to March, rattlesnakes brumate, which is the reptilian version of hibernation. They don't sleep per se, but their metabolism slows way down, and they remain tucked away underground until spring, and the cycle repeats. I feel like I just made it sound like rattlesnakes are these really busy animals, but that's not the case at all. That's just me. Their lives are like a slow, peaceful ribbon of time, punctuated by brief flashes of intensity, like catching a mouse or finding a mate. But as the author Chuck Bowden stated, they live on snake time, and snake time is pretty mellow. So at this point, we know a lot about our scaly new friends, their sense of home, annual to-do lists, their social lives. But now let's talk about why they matter. I've mentioned that they like to eat rodents, but I'd like to expand a little bit more on their ecological importance. So here's a simplified Columbia River Gorge food web. Rattlesnakes sit right in the middle here. They're a mesopredator. And I used just photos of rattlesnakes here, but know that many other snakes help fill this important role. So rattlesnakes eat mainly rodents, and then they're eaten by these higher level predators as well. So when an animal like a golden eagle eats a rattlesnake, they're eating the snake and all of the rodents stuffed inside of it. So snakes concentrate energy and they pass it up the food chain. Snakes occupy a physical niche, limbless, ectothermic, that's unavailable to mammals. So this allows them to become naturally abundant. And they can also survive long periods without food, thanks ectothermy. And this causes their populations to be very stable. And both of these traits make them a really consistent and critical food source for these top predators who we know and love. Rattlesnakes, give a lot to the food web while taking relatively little. Because each snake doesn't need much food, yet collectively they still really effectively regulate rodent populations. And that directly benefits us. Hey, Scott. By eating all of these rodents, rattlesnakes prevent the spread of diseases like hantavirus and the plague. And one study estimated that a single rattlesnake can remove thousands of ticks from the ecosystem just by eating the rodents that the ticks live on. Another fascinating recent discovery is that rattlesnakes are secondary seed dispersers. So when they eat mice with unchewed seeds stored in their cheek pouches, the rattlesnakes plant those seeds in their poop. And some of these native seeds germinated in rattlesnake poop have significantly higher germination rates than ones planted without it. So rattlesnakes might be like little gardeners, inadvertently shaping our plant communities. Rattlesnakes are also really important to biodiversity. There's about 50 species, depending who you ask, ranging from Canada down to northern Argentina. And many of them are threatened or endangered, but they receive less conservation attention than other more popular animals because they're snakes. They're also culturally significant. Many indigenous tribes view rattlesnakes as rain bringers and spiritual messengers. And petroglyphs of them all over the United States demonstrate their importance to the cosmology of indigenous tribes. The extraordinary toxins found in snake venom are regularly used to develop life-saving drugs like ACE inhibitors and eptifibatide, which is a blood clotting medication developed from pygmy rattlesnake venom. And then there's my favorite argument for why rattlesnakes matter, because everything matters. They have been here for millions of years before us. They don't need to earn their right to exist. They already have it. The author Robin Wall Kimmerer writes about reciprocity, of giving back to the earth that sustains us. Rattlesnakes benefit us in many ways. The least we could try to do is coexist with them. The danger that rattlesnakes pose is wildly overblown. Yes, they are venomous, but their venom is not for us, and their bites are extremely rare. There's fewer than 20 bites reported each year in Washington state, and less than 10 people die annually nationwide, and that's usually because they didn't seek medical treatment. However, a rattlesnake bite is a medical emergency, and the only thing you need to do if bitten is go straight to a hospital. Please don't try to kill the snake. That will not help anything, and it could earn you another bite. But just remember, you are 5 times more likely to die from a lightning strike than from a venomous snake bite. When bites do happen, the snake is acting out of self-defense. It's afraid for its life. So trying not to scare or surprise rattlesnakes is the key to not getting bitten. And what this means is that when we're in rattlesnake country, we have to operate with a higher level of vigilance, mindfulness, and care. And this looks like watching where we put our hands and feet. And for instance, before we garden, checking an area thoroughly. When we're walking around at night, use a flashlight and walk slowly. And then, of course, please don't antagonize snakes. That's a great way to get bitten. When we see a snake on a trail, we should give it plenty of space and let it move away on its own. If it's not moving, we can slowly walk behind it and do so carefully. I recommend taking photos and relishing the experience of seeing a wild rattlesnake. You're lucky, and you never know. It might do something cool, like crawl over a log. When we live in rattlesnake country, there's precautions we can take to keep everybody safe. So we can notice where rattlesnakes like to hang out. Rock piles are a big one, and we can be more careful in those areas. We can clean up rodent attractants like scrap wood piles. Please don't use poison or glue traps. They kill wildlife indiscriminately, and garden netting can also entangle snakes and birds. There's rattlesnake avoidance training courses to help keep dogs and snakes safe. And we can teach kids to recognize rattlesnakes and stay away from them and to tell an adult when they see one. But please, don't teach kids to be afraid of snakes. Curiosity deserves to be nurtured. Rattlesnakes are not out to get us. They're a sign that a landscape is still alive and wild. Encountering them doesn't have to be something that we fear or dread. It can be a moment of joy and wonder. Learning to live with them is just learning to live with all parts of nature. So as a conservation biologist living in the midst of a sixth mass extinction event, I would be remiss to not address the threats rattlesnakes face. So first, it's important to note that they have a K-selected life history strategy. So this is characterized by long generation times, delayed sexual maturity, parental investment, all these traits that make them so charismatic and fascinating and wonderful, but they also render them more vulnerable to extinction because they have a hard time adapting quickly to novel or rapid disturbance. Habitat loss is the #1 driver of extinction across all wildlife species. Rattlesnakes have site fidelity in large home ranges that are easily fragmented by development. If their hibernacula aren't destroyed and some food and shelter and water and basic resources remain, they can tolerate some degree of disturbance, but when their habitats are converted to man-made landscapes, their world becomes more dangerous, one with rodenticide, unsympathetic humans, and roads. Roads are another huge threat to rattlesnakes. So snakes are inherently vulnerable to being hit by cars because they're slow moving and they have this elongate body form that takes up more space on the road. Roads tend to bisect snakes' natural routes from their hibernacula to critical resources like hunting areas in Scott's case. And when this is the case, snakes risk being struck by a car at least twice per year. During my undergraduate research, I found that a road with about 4,000 vehicles a day killed over 70% of the snakes trying to cross it. For reference, Highway 14 has about 4,500 daily vehicles, and as some of you may be aware, snakes regularly cross that road. High traffic roads can limit gene flow in rattlesnake populations, and in British Columbia, where northern Pacific rattlesnakes are endangered, even a low traffic road with just a few hundred daily vehicles is causing enough unnatural additive adult mortality that it's projected to set the snakes on a path to extinction within the century. So the solution to these issues is, of course, wildlife crossing structures, overpasses and underpasses that the snakes can use to avoid the road itself. But these are expensive, they're slow to build, and there's no guarantee that they'll be built with snakes in mind. So in the meantime, just please watch out for snakes on the road. In addition to landscape level impacts, we are changing the climate itself. So this disproportionately impacts ectotherms because it forces them to shift or limit their activity windows to avoid overheating. And these northern migrations that we talk about for many species will be difficult for low mobility animals like snakes when they run into these barriers like freeways and cities. Also, reduced snowpack increases winter predation pressure on rodents. So when the snakes wake up, the rodent populations are already depleted and they have a harder time finding food. And I worry that that might be the case this summer. Climate change also facilitates the spread of invasive species and disease. And rattlesnakes are increasingly threatened by novel pathogens, such as parasitic lungworm infections and snake fungal disease, both of which this poor dusky pygmy rattlesnake suffered from. These diseases are causing significant population declines of rattlesnakes in the eastern US, and they're spreading into the Northwest and in the gorge in particular. So it's really important to disinfect our gear between sites to safeguard snake populations, and this mainly applies to people like me who are recreationally out looking for snakes. And then in addition to all of these pressures, snakes are facing increasingly severe wildfires, like the Burdowin fire that we just had here. So wildfires affect rattlesnakes in a variety of ways. First, snakes die in the actual fire. So studies show that post-fire rattlesnake populations are skewed towards smaller snakes. And this makes sense because the fires tend to happen in the summer when the snakes are away from their dens. And so these bigger animals are going to have a harder time finding adequate refugia from the flames, especially a non-flammable shelter. Following the fire, snakes have to negotiate living in a barren landscape. So without vegetation, they're especially exposed to predators, and their habitat quality is overall decreased with a reduction in food, water, and shelter. The shrub steppe is not a fire-adapted landscape for the most part, and so snakes tend to have really stark population declines following wildfire in that biome. But the good news is that the pine oak woodland is a fire-resilient biome, and so as the vegetation recovers, the snake populations will likely rebound within the next few generations, or at least I hope. When I first started studying rattlesnakes in the shrub steppe of central Washington, where I live, very few of my sites had burned. And now, almost all of them have burned. So the effects that these fires have had on the snakes are palpable, especially when roads and wildfire interact. The last snake I want to tell you about is Wishbone. So Wishbone and I first met in 2016, and he has this incredible marking on his head. It's a little white wishbone shape, so he's really easy to identify. He also has this cool jigsaw neck pattern. He's just a really cool looking snake. So Wishbone regularly crossed one of my study roads, and like many snakes in the area, the highway cut directly between his den and his foraging grounds. He always crossed in the same 100-meter stretch of the road between July and August, site fidelity, and I always knew when to expect him. So I saw him in 2016, 17, 18, Snapchat, 20, and 2022. Ugh, he's such a good snake. I never got any nice photos of Wishbone because despite my best efforts, I only ever found him at night crossing a 3-lane highway, so forgive the iPhone photos. In 2018, in the summer, a vehicle-ignited wildfire burned the north side of the road, where the hibernacula were, and at the time, most of the snakes were on the south side foraging. Come fall, as snakes crossed the road back to their dens, they were met with a scorched landscape. And they would cross the road into the burn and then turn right back around, which is very unusual behavior. I think it's possible that the chemical trails they were following were erased by the fire. They were lost. I don't know how many snakes made it back to the den that year, but Wishbone survived. The last time I saw Wishbone, he was thin, and he had an old healed injury, possibly from being hit by a car. I don't know if he's still alive, and I don't think the odds are good. But Wishbone persisted for years in an increasingly hostile landscape. And I do like to think that somewhere out there, some of his babies might still be alive, and maybe one of them has a perfect little white wishbone on its head. In a time when our choices increasingly shape the natural world, snakes face more challenges than ever. But one of the greatest may be misunderstanding. And in our region, no snake carries that burden more than rattlesnakes. So how did we get here? Well, it starts with colonialism. Early settlers framed rattlesnakes as enemies of man and God alike. State-sponsored bounties paved way for their extirpation in the Northeast, and killing rattlesnakes was treated as a moral good. And that narrative has never really gone away, has it? American literature and media have echoed this story for centuries. We've been brainwashed into thinking it's us versus them, no room for coexistence. As the writer Elsa Pearl put it, in America, the rattlesnake sacrifice seems virtually inevitable. Don't you think it's time we rewrite this story? Rattlesnakes are still killed all the time for simply existing, and society applauds it. And this mentality has population-level consequences. Remember how my advisor, Dan Beck, found that we can tell when females start reproducing by examining when their rattles stop growing? Well, Dan had the brilliant idea to compare female rattlesnakes between sites with different levels of human impacts. So the site on the top row here, Umtanum Canyon, has a popular hiking trail where rattlesnakes are regularly killed by people. And looking at their rattles, Dan found that the females at Umtanum are reproducing earlier than the females at other sites. They're hedging their bets that they'll die young, reproducing earlier rather than later, before their brief lives are cut short by a passing human. And it gets worse than just sporadic killings. In some parts of the country, there are still systematic attempts to eradicate rattlesnakes through rattlesnake roundups. These are for-profit events where thousands of wild-caught rattlesnakes are tortured and slaughtered for public entertainment. Fittingly, the world's largest rattlesnake roundup took place just this past weekend in Sweetwater, Texas. Unsurprisingly, roundups cause the local rattlesnake populations to decline, but I think that the worst part about them is that children learn to fear and hate these animals, and the cycle perpetuates. these animals: Scott, Penelope, Wishbone, animals with social bonds and parental care, who eat our pests and quietly share our landscape. Something isn't right. Rattlesnakes are one of the few wild animals who still face this level of socially acceptable persecution. We made a mistake when we demonized them, and they need our advocacy now more than ever. A few years ago, two wonderful rattlesnake advocates, Melissa Amarello and Emily Taylor, worked with a class at Cal Poly to send rattlesnake education and advocacy materials to parents, teachers, and scout leaders all across the country. The kids wrote letters and made art expressing their concern for rattlesnakes, and these letters were sent to the residents of Sweetwater, Texas. Imagine a world where kids didn't have to defend their favorite creature's right to exist. A rattlesnake is a shy, fleeting, resilient animal trying to survive in a rapidly changing world. For centuries, we've projected our fear and discomfort with the unfamiliar onto snakes, and in doing so, we've harmed them, the ecosystems we depend on, and our own relationship with the natural world. Maybe all it takes is a small change of heart. Meeting snakes with understanding or curiosity instead of fear is a powerful shift. It makes our world a little more alive, mysterious, and enchanted. Rattlesnakes are not our enemies. They're our neighbors. So let's be better neighbors. Thank you.
I always use this mic, even though I have a mic on. So Alex will bring the house lights up. This is your chance to ask questions, and then we'll get a chance to see and touch snakes. So if you have a question, don't be shy. And I often think that the people who say, this is a stupid question, that's often the question everyone has. So, yes. Can you pass that back? Hi, Bob.
Thank you very much for all of your comments and your slides and everything. Can you tell me, do rattlesnakes in particular, feed on eggs of birds or other creatures?
Go for it.
I have a microphone.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, that's a good question. To my knowledge, no. Northern Pacifics, that's not a typical prey item for them. You know, in ecology, there's no rules, right? There's always weird, strange exceptions, but no, rattlesnakes are not thought to be like a primarily egg-eating species, and at least I can definitely speak for Northern Pacific rattlesnakes. That's not really their cup of tea. There are lots of snakes who do eat bird eggs, like gopher snakes do, but I don't think that it's rattlesnakes' primary or even normal food source for them.
Okay. Yes, Connie, I'm coming. Connie works for one of our sponsors, SCA, thank you. Hey, guys, shout out the sponsors. We love our sponsors.
Snakes do something called brumation versus hibernation. Am I making that up, or
No,
is that a real term?
That's true. Yeah, I said it, but I may have muttered it. Brumation is basically the ectotherm's version of hibernation. So instead of sleeping, they just basically slow their metabolisms way down, which kind of naturally happens as the temperatures fall, and then they just sort of are in a state of suspended animation. Physiologically, not a lot is going on, and they're just really burning almost no calories during that time. And sometimes they can get caught in a cold snap and sort of like get forced into brumation, if that makes sense. And sometimes there's mortality that occurs from that because they can't really get away from these cold temperatures at a certain point because they can't move very quickly.
But they don't come in and out.
No.
They stay in their den.
Well, if temperatures permit them to. So like when we had some warm weather a few weeks ago, like when it got up into the 60s, and if, one of the rattlesnake dens had a lot of sun shining on it for a few days, it's very possible that snakes could have warmed up enough to come up to the surface, and then once it cooled down again, they basically were forced back underground.
Okay. Yes.
Is it true that they only choose south-facing dens, and is it true that they will sometimes den with other snake species?
Yes, both are true. Well, no, sorry.
Oh.
South-facing dens is like, people love to say that they only den in south-facing slopes, but they will den in any facing slope. It kind of depends on elevation. Like if we're at a really high elevation site, a north-facing aspect is just not going to permit enough solar radiation for them. But at low elevation sites, there's lots of north, east, and west-facing den sites, so it really is site-specific. Yeah, what was the other part of that question?
Will they den with other snake species?
Yes, yeah, that's very common. Yeah, I think, and the other snakes are just harder to detect. They spend a lot more time underground, so even if you don't see other snake species at a communal rattlesnake den, if there's a lot of snakes using a den, it's a great spot, and so the odds are very good that lots of other snake species, or at least a few, are also using it. Thank you. Yeah.
Go ahead, Vince.
So your photos in the presentation were incredible.
Thanks.
And
Some
I
of them were
wondered-
Tyler's.
Okay, yeah. I wondered if you could offer any tips for how to safely and respectfully photograph and observe rattlesnakes when you encounter them in the wild.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of getting super low to the ground, and like, if you see a rattlesnake, just freeze for a couple minutes. If you want to get to observe it, and even if they are startled by you, you still have room for forgiveness. So I often surprise snakes, and then I just sort of hang back, watch them. I use binoculars a lot. I watch them, wait till they've sort of relaxed their posture, and they don't take very long to kind of resume whatever they were doing before. And yeah, I would just get low to the ground. Several feet of space is a really good idea, but you know, if you are really aware of your surroundings, like I photograph rattlesnakes within a few feet of them, but I just try not to be too intrusive, right? Like you don't want to get up all in their business, and I don't have a lot of photos of snakes being defensive because I'm trying not to elicit that kind of behavior from them. But yeah, just we could talk more about that, huh? Zoom lens, big one, yeah, big old zoom lens. Yeah, we love a zoom lens.
Thanks, Tyler.
Yeah.
Go for it.
I was wondering how big do they usually like leave their mother? Like how big do they get before they leave their mother?
Do you have some ideas about when you can leave me?
Yeah, so after the females give birth, the babies hang out with her for about 2 weeks, but sometimes longer, and then they all kind of split off from one another. The female usually goes and gets a much-needed meal, and the babies will just sort of putz around exploring this big bad new world, but they will often reunite at the den later that fall, or you know, they follow her chemical trail to find their dens. And so I think there's studies that show that snakes, like daughters, will hang out with their mothers well into their own adult maturity. So they still live in the same sort of family group.
You mentioned briefly programs for helping train like dogs for rattlesnake encounters. I was wondering where I could learn more about one in my area.
Yeah, so I should have done my homework. I know there's one in Wenatchee. There's a provider for rattlesnake avoidance training out there. He's licensed. I think he does multiple courses a year. So you could just Google rattlesnake avoidance training Wenatchee. But I'm sure there's more in Oregon than Washington. So I think I would just Google it and you'll find something.
In the area who had any advice on what happens if a dog comes in with a snake bite here? Have you had that happen yet? Of Tucker Road Veterinarian Clinic, who's also a sponsor.
We use anti-venom. There actually isn't data to support that it's more effective than just supportive care. Anti-venom tends to lessen the severity sometimes, but survival is really good if dogs get bit, because a lot of times they're dry bites and they're not venomous bites. I love snakes, by the way.
I love that.
Let's do a couple more and then it's okay, and you guys can ask Adrian questions afterwards.
Hi, could you talk a little bit more about how to safely, responsibly relocate one that is living in your immediate area?
Yeah. I knew I would get this question. The laws are a little tricky with relocation. So, guidelines for relocating snakes, it's like a rock pile or an area where you know other snakes are hanging out that's not in the zone where you don't want them to be is always a great idea. So I tend to really do my homework and sort of scout out the general area, figure out where other snakes are hanging out before I move a snake. But not moving them over a quarter mile is sort of a rule. And we can definitely talk more about that after this because sometimes relocation is necessary, like with Scott. But those would be that's my advice. But we can talk afterward too.
When we're here, and then we're going to do wrap up, and then we're going to do snakes.
Perfect.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciated the comments about habitat threats. And could you speak a little bit more about their range-wide conservation status and whether they're protected under state or federal law in either of our two states here?
No. Northern Pacific rattlesnakes are not protected in Washington, they're not even classified. So they don't even have the protections that a game species would get. So you're allowed to kill them, but you're not allowed to pick one up in some cases. So they have very little, they're a common and widespread species, I will say that, but they're losing habitat at an alarming rate, especially with, just development and renewable energy and all sorts of habitat threats that are popping up. So they may end up, in British Columbia, I mentioned briefly, they are federally endangered, I believe. And that's the same species that we have here. So, these species that are common now will not always be common. And we tend to take that for granted. But no, they don't have any protected status.
Okay. Let me do my last song and dance, and then if you and Tyler want to talk to Jill and whoever else is here visiting. So real quick, you guys, next month, last flagship event of season 16 is the Crag Rats. I think we'll get it up here. Show one, the normal show at the normal time has sold out. If you're a sponsor, we have space for you, don't worry. And so we went ahead and added a second show thanks to Christopher Van Tilburg, our guest. He said he could do a second show, and CCA could do a second show, and Alice could do a second show. So know that there is a 5 p.m. show, and tickets are already selling fast for that. So get on that for next month. It's April 15th. I also want to make sure that you guys are aware, Sense of Place gets speakers in a number of different ways. Sometimes it's someone saying, hey, there's this cool person, you should go find them, or us doing direct outreach. The other way is through our RFP, so you can send us a proposal. Do take a look at the types of talks we have. We're an education program, so we like stories and educational slants on the cultural and natural heritage of the gorge. That is online now, and the deadline for that is May 15th. That's at senseofplacegorge.org. Big news, April, we also just added a special event. I heard some O's. You guys, I love you guys, yes! Some of you guys, if you were here for the Gifford Pinchot talk that we had earlier this year where we looked at sort of a century of managing forests, which again, that seems so audacious that we manage forests, but we do, and we need to. You may remember that this man's name came up. Jerry Franklin is known as a lot of things, but one of them is the father of new forestry, and he's going to come to the gorge and talk to us about why all this matters, some of the history of his own personal experience living through. He's sort of like a Forrest Gump in some ways, of like all these milestone moments in forest management. Jerry Franklin was there. So we're going to hear some of that. So if this whole concept is new to you, don't worry. I've asked him to give us some context for those folks who are either new to the area or have not followed forest management over the last century. And then he's going to talk some about what he's seeing ahead and some of his own evolution of ideas of what we need to be doing to keep forests healthy. So that is a pop-up event next month. That's at the Bingen Theater. Tickets are not on sale yet. I'm working on that because it's all through the nonprofit. So stay tuned. That will come soon. And that is the last thing for now, except for you guys to help me before we turn off the live stream and look at snakes. Thank Adrian Slade for coming and telling us about rattlesnakes. She's not here. So, if you need to go to bed, please feel free to exit, but I would love to have you stay. And in a second, Adrian and I will share some snakes, and Tyler's getting Cooper. Okay, Cooper is going to come out in a sec. You'll see his head will be in a tube. So he's chilling in that way, and you'll get to see his body and tail and be able to pet him. So you're welcome to get up and move about and come see some snakes. Thanks, you all. Hi. Let's see. Let's go see. Okay. Dad might go get Daddy's phone. Okay. Yeah. Adrian, is this Jill? That's Jill. Would you be okay with me getting? Okay, so she has a snake. Okay.